9:20. It is the Moon Griffon Show. I'm Ken Romero sitting in for Moon today. Moon's taking some much-needed time off. And joining us this morning from Baton Rouge is Jeremy Alford from lawpolitics.com. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Hey, good morning. Doing pretty good.
Well, doing good. Great. Staying out of the heat. Let's not all melt here. I got a couple of things I'd like to talk to you about. And one, well, they all involve our governor. Governor Jindal, do you think he's going to actually make the debates at the rate he's going now? He's polling so low. When you see national polls come out, like on Fox News, they'll have like 15 people up there, and Bobby Jindal's not on it. And what do they use, the top 10 people to start the debates?
Yeah, and he's outside of that top 10 tier. I mean, the best the governor can hope for is there's been talk of a secondary forum. Kind of for these second-tier candidates, which, you know, these early caucus states, you know, the voters there take these things very seriously, and they want to see that second-tier debate. So, you know, Governor Jindal certainly hopes to make that secondary group, and, you know, he's going to have to make a splash in that forum, because the worst thing you can be as a presidential candidate is irrelevant, and if he can come out somehow and make some type of big splash that would, you know, make him somewhat relevant, at least get him in the headlines.
Yeah, like I said, I think you've got to be in the top 10. So if they're going to do two tiers of debates, it's like, you know, when you award certain prizes for the losers as well as the winners, it's like, well, you didn't make the race, so we'll give you another race where you might be able to do better. They take it serious. I know they take the caucuses seriously. But it's like, come on, if you're polling 1% and somebody like Donald Trump is out polling you, it seems like they should draw the line at 10.
Yeah, it's such a large field, but you can't help but feel like Governor Jindal is probably more concerned about another type of consolation prize, which, you know, we like to say there's no second place in politics, but in a big race like this, sometimes there's handsome consolation prizes, and maybe Jindal, you know, sees an angle where he could maybe get on in a high-profile position in D.C. I think a cabinet position or VP slot is probably a long shot, but there's always something maybe with the RNC or maybe, you know, flipping his own nonprofit, which we've already seen him kind of dip his toes into those policy waters with his own group already.
Yeah, Jeremy, you know, you mentioned a vice presidency and a cabinet slot. It seems to me a cabinet slot would be the easiest thing that Bobby Jindal could accomplish in this race, because, you know, he's on Fox almost every day. He's on other national shows as well. So he's getting a lot of name recognition for people that work in the government, at least. And, you know, as our cohort, John Sutherland, says on our show in the afternoon on Go Acadiana, he said, you look at it, Bobby Jindal could conceivably lose in Iowa, lose in New Hampshire, win South Carolina, and lose Louisiana and still make it to the presidential runoff.
Yeah, I mean, if you monkey around with the numbers enough, you can make anything possible. But you bring up a good point. You know, the governor has a big operation in South Carolina, which I think is often overlooked. But, you know, let's not forget, Bobby Jindal's certainly not the only candidate in that field thinking about these consolation prizes and these kind of, you know, second, third, fourth place gets. You know, I would imagine that the folks who are going to end up toward the top of the pack are going to have to go down the list and see who's willing to take what in exchange for what. And I'm sure Bobby Jindal's folks are eagerly awaiting that day.
Yeah. Well, Dr. John Sutherland did compare Bobby Jindal and Bill Clinton in that respect, losing Iowa, losing New Hampshire, winning one southern state, and losing his home state and still winning the presidency. So Dr. John Sutherland says it's not out of the realm of possibility that Bobby Jindal could pull off a win even.
Yeah, and there have been comparisons to former President Jimmy Carter as well, all three being Southern governors, having to come from behind. You know, the question is Bobby Jindal a Bill Clinton? Is he a Jimmy Carter? You know, Bill Clinton, obviously the comeback kid, had to overcome a great deal more than Bobby Jindal will ever have to. But it was a different field then. I think the competition wasn't as stiff. There weren't as many candidates. And the tone of of the electorate was turning Democrat after former President Bush and his no new taxes, read my lips promise. But I think it's going to be difficult for a Republican to win president next year, and unless they can find a way to really pick up some momentum in terms of minority voters.
Yeah, my biggest fear is the fact that Donald Trump is where he is, but he may not win the nomination, may run as a third-party candidate, and if he does that, I'm afraid a Democrat will be a shoo-in. It may not be Hillary Clinton, but God forbid it would be Joe Biden. And if it is Joe Biden and Joe Biden wins and Hillary Clinton is his running mate and she gets in as vice president, I would really carefully watch my back if I were Joe Biden.
Yeah, and it certainly seems to be moving in that direction with Donald Trump. It's clear the party doesn't want him. It's clear that he doesn't feel at home with the party. So he may have to pivot and do something dramatic like that. You have to wonder what his poll numbers would do if he does make that decision, if we wouldn't see maybe a repeat of a Ross Perot candidacy, although I think we've all learned from the financial disclosure reports that Donald Trump doesn't exactly have the cash to throw around that Ross Perot did.
Yeah, and, the thing with Donald Trump having that amount of money, a lot of people say, well, he can't be bought. And no, he can't be bought, but he can go off and do his crazy agenda and not have to worry about what people think about him either. So we have to consider that. We've got a couple of minutes left here, and we'll be back, Jeremy, after this break. If you'll come back with us, we'll talk some more about Bobby Jindal and references to some actions he took during the past week that some people see as good and some people go, maybe not so good. So we'll talk about that. We hope you'll come back and join us, okay?
Okay.
Good deal. Stick around. It's 9:27. And it is the Moon Griffon Show. The call-in number a little bit later after we get off our conversation with Jeremy Alford will be the Hickson Hotline, 1-844-766-6607. That's 1-844-766-6607. And next hour, Stuart Cathy will be our guest, and he's running against State Senator Jim Fannin. Stuart Cathy's a state representative at this time, and Jim Fannin, in case you've forgotten, is head of the Appropriations Committee, and Moon Griffon's talked about Big Jim Leg Fannin quite a bit. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll come back with that. We hope you'll stick around. The Moon Griffon Show, I'm Ken Romero. 9:34 on the Moon Griffon Show. Good morning. I'm Ken Romero filling in for Moon today, and our guest is Jeremy Alford from lawpolitics.com. Jeremy, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, and we want to talk a little bit more about Governor Jindal. I appreciate the fact that the governor came back to Louisiana, to Lafayette, to be here at the scene of our tragic shooting Thursday night. Of course, there's some people who question the fact that this seems to be the only time we've seen Bobby Jindal in months that he came back for something like this. And I kind of think of Rahm Emanuel saying, never let a tragedy go to waste. And I try to get by that. Did you see his executive order that he issued last week?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. And look, when you run for president and you're on the campaign trail for that job, when you're supposed to be performing another job as governor, everything that you do, especially when it's as high profile and as sensitive as this, is just going to naturally be questioned. I was a little disheartened to see in the daily Louisiana newspaper the day after the shooting, that there's already a story about whether the governor would benefit from this. I kind of saw the headline and frowned to myself and chose not to read it.
Yeah.
But it's obvious. I think just the folks that are follow politics and they're in politics who make a living off of it were, kind of had those thoughts when the governor did show up on the scene.
Yeah.
But I think that if he is going to show up on the scene, that folks are going to expect some type of executive action or some type of response aside from just being in front of the cameras.
Right. And to be fair to Bobby Jindal, I think he would have appeared one way or the other, even if he was not campaigning out of the state. If he was in Baton Rouge, he would have been in Lafayette, to be fair with him. But it just like you said, everything you do as a candidate is examined. So I'm sure people nationwide are saying, he was in Iowa yesterday and he dashed to Lafayette or whatever. So I'm sure it looks bad to some people. But he issued an executive order instructing enforcement to enforce Louisiana law that protects against disturbing the peace at funeral services after reports surfaced that certain groups intend to protest the funerals. And we're talking about the Westboro Unchurch. And, why do you have to issue an executive order to tell officers to do the job that they were hired to do? I don't get it.
Yeah, and sometimes these executive orders allow for some extra enforcement factors and maybe even some attention and funding that wouldn't be available anyway. But, it's a practice of governors and presidents to issue these executive orders, which are more or less unenforceable, or maybe they overlap with existing law and really aren't needed.
Yeah.
And so the executive order becomes really more of a political tool than a practical tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we saw here. But I guess the good news is that it ended up not being needed anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think when politicians show up at these kind of things, and we expect them to be there, but I think we also expect them to do something meaningful. And I think that was just probably an attempt to do that, and whether it had any real effect is I guess is debatable.
I guess it's human nature also to hope that they will show up, and if they do, we question their motives. So I guess that's the American way as well. So I was, like I said, when I saw the executive order, every Friday afternoon we're inundated with press releases from the governor's office that he's appointed somebody to be dog catcher in Timbuktu or the flea dog inspector or whatever. And it's disheartening to see another thing come out of the governor's office at this particular time. But anyway, I'm so glad that the Westboro people decided not to come to Lafayette. And as I said earlier on the show, I think a lot of times they go to these things just so that they might run into people who might want to enforce the local law or might take the law into their own hands so that they could get some, let's say, financial rewards out of a lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what they were thinking. But, I mean, obviously that this is a time for family and friends to mourn and to think about the losses that have been suffered. And, I don't think it's necessarily a time for politics, although this is an issue that's part of a larger debate, and other communities have gone through the same thing. And, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with trying to look at this holistically and see how it's being repeated in other communities, unfortunately.
Yeah. Jeremy, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I know we're running short on time here. I'm watching my clock, and I know I'm going to have to let you go. But I appreciate Jeremy Alford joining us today from lawpolitics.com. It's a great site. Go visit it today, lawpolitics.com. Jeremy, thanks for your input. We appreciate you taking the time here.
I enjoyed it. Take care.
All right. Thank you, man. Moon Griffon Show with Jeremy Alford. Always a great guest. We get lots of great information from him. And we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about, gun rights, gun control. Metal detectors, too. The Moon Griffon Show. We'll be back shortly. I'm Ken Romero.